It was a bright, sunny afternoon in Pinewood Heights. This was a small, quiet neighborhood where houses sat close together, and kids rode bikes down the street. Everyone knew everyone, or at least, that's what they thought. The trees were green, the birds were singing, and everything seemed peaceful. But something exciting was about to happen, something no one saw coming. Let me introduce you to Jake. He was the new guy in town. Jake had just moved into a little house on the corner with his dog, Max. Now, Max wasn't just any dog. He had big, floppy ears that bounced when he ran, and a goofy smile that made people laugh. Jake was nice too. He waved at people when he walked by, said hello with a big smile, and didn't bother anyone. He liked to keep things simple, just him and Max, hanging out, enjoying their new home. But not everyone liked Jake. There was one person who didn't want him around at all. Her name was Linda. Linda was the boss of the neighborhood, or at least, she acted like it. People called her the HOA Queen. HOA stands for Homeowners Association, which is a group that makes rules for the neighborhood. Linda loved rules. She carried a clipboard everywhere she went, writing down every little thing she didn't like. If your grass was too tall, Linda would know. If your trash can stayed out too long, Linda would knock on your door. She walked around like she owned the whole street, telling people what to do. Linda had short, gray hair and a loud voice. She wore big sunglasses and always had a frown on her face. When she saw Jake move in, she didn't smile or wave like the other neighbors. Nope. She squinted her eyes, crossed her arms, and decided right then and there that Jake was trouble. She didn't even give him a chance. Maybe it was because he was new. Maybe it was because Max ran around the yard barking. Whatever it was, Linda made up her mind, Jake didn't belong in Pinewood Heights. The first day Jake moved in, Linda watched him from her porch across the street. She saw him carrying boxes into the house, Max trotting behind him with his wagging tail. Most people would think, oh, a new neighbor. That's nice. But not Linda. She grabbed her clipboard, flipped to a new page, and started writing. She mumbled to herself, new guy. Dog. Too loud already. I'll keep an eye on him. She didn't know it yet, but that clipboard wasn't going to help her this time. See, Jake wasn't just some regular guy with a dog. He was friendly and quiet, sure, but there was more to him than that. Linda had no idea who he really was. She thought she had everything figured out, like she always did. She thought she could boss Jake around, scare him with her rules, and make him follow her orders. But here's the fun part: she was wrong. Really, really wrong. Jake had a secret, a big one, and it was going to shake up her perfect little world. Let's talk about Max for a second. Max was a happy dog. He loved chasing squirrels, rolling in the grass, and barking at birds. His bark was loud, really loud. It wasn't a mean bark, though. It was more like Max saying, "Hey, world. I'm here. Isn't it great?" The other neighbors didn't mind. Some even laughed when they heard it. "That's just Max being Max," they'd say. But Linda? Oh, Linda hated that bark. To her, it was like a siren going off, ruining her day. She'd stomp her foot and mutter, "That dog's gotta go." Jake didn't seem to care what Linda thought. He'd just pat Max on the head and say, "Good boy." He'd smile that calm, easy smile of his and go about his day. If Linda glared at him from her porch, he'd wave back like nothing was wrong. It was almost like he knew something she didn't. And guess what? He did. The neighborhood was pretty normal otherwise. There was Mr. Carter, who watered his flowers every morning. There was little Sophie, who rode her scooter up and down the sidewalk. And then there was Linda, always watching, always judging. Everyone was used to her by now. They'd roll their eyes when she yelled about something silly, like a mailbox painted the wrong color. But Jake? He was new. He didn't know Linda's tricks yet, or so it seemed. That sunny afternoon, everything was quiet at first. Jake was outside tossing a ball for Max to chase. The dog ran back and forth, barking happily. Woof. Woof. The sound bounced off the houses. Most people didn't even look up. But Linda did. She stepped out of her house, clipboard in hand, and marched toward Jake's yard. Her lips were pressed tight, and her eyes were narrow. She was ready for a fight. You she shouted, pointing at Jake. That dog is too loud. This is a peaceful neighborhood, and you're ruining it. Jake looked up from the ball, not even a little surprised. He's just playing, ma'am, he said, nice and polite. Linda huffed. Playing? That's no excuse. I'm writing you up. She scribbled something on her clipboard and stormed off, her shoes clicking on the pavement. Jake watched her go. He didn't yell back. He didn't argue. He just stood there, calm as ever, with Max sitting by his side. But if you looked close, you might have seen a tiny sparkle in his eye, like he was holding back a laugh. Why wasn't he mad? Why didn't he care? That's the thing about Jake. There was something special about him, something Linda couldn't see. And that little secret? It was about to make everything crazy. So, what do you think so far? Are you wondering who Jake really is? Are you curious about what's going to happen to Linda? Good. Because this story is just getting started. Stick around, because things are about to get wild. Linda thought she was in charge, but she had no clue what was coming. And trust me, you're going to love it. It all began with Max, Jake's big, goofy dog. Max had a bark that was loud, super loud. Woof. It boomed across the yards like a drum, bouncing off houses and trees. It wasn't a mean bark or a scary one. No way. It was a happy bark, like Max was shouting, "Hi, everyone. I'm here. Isn't it fun?" When Max barked, his floppy ears flapped, and his tail wagged like crazy. Most neighbors thought it was funny. They'd hear that big woof and smile. That's just Max, they'd say, chuckling as they watered their plants or mowed their grass. But not Linda. Oh no. Linda didn't think it was funny at all. To her, Max's bark was the worst thing ever. It was like a giant noise ruining her perfect, quiet day. Linda liked everything just so neat, calm, and under her control. That bark? It was a crime to her. She'd sit on her porch, sipping her tea, and then woof, Max would let loose. Her face would scrunch up, her lips would get tight, and she'd slam her cup down. That dog, she'd mutter. She couldn't stand it. One day, Linda decided she'd had enough. It was a sunny morning, and Max was out in Jake's yard, chasing a squirrel. Woof. Woof. His bark rang out, loud and clear. The squirrel scampered up a tree, and Max bounced around, happy as could be. Jake was inside, sipping coffee, not even noticing. But Linda noticed. She jumped up from her chair, her face turning red like a big, ripe tomato. She grabbed her clipboard, the one she always carried, and stomped across the street to Jake's house. Jake was just stepping onto his porch when Linda got there. She marched right up the steps, her shoes making loud clack-clack noises. She stopped in front of him, pointing a bony finger right at his face. "Your mud is a menace," she yelled. Her voice was sharp, like a teacher scolding a kid who forgot their homework. "That barking has to stop. I'm calling the HOA right now. That dog's gotta go." She waved her clipboard like it was a magic wand that could make Max disappear. Jake didn't even blink. He just stood there, holding his coffee mug, and smiled. It was a calm, easy smile, like nothing Linda said could bother him. "He's just being a dog, ma'am," he said, nice and polite. His voice was soft, not loud or mad. Max trotted over and sat by Jake's feet, looking up at Linda with big, happy eyes. Woof. He barked once, like he was saying hello to her too. But Linda didn't care. She huffed a big, angry puff of air and spun around. "You'll see," she snapped. "This isn't over." Then she marched off, her clipboard tucked under her arm, already pulling out her phone to call someone. Jake watched her go. He took a sip of his coffee and leaned against the porch railing. His eyes were sharp now, like he was thinking hard about something. He wasn't mad, not yet. He didn't yell or chase after her. He just stood there, quiet, with Max wagging his tail beside him. But if you looked close, there was something in his stare. It wasn't just calm. It was like he knew something Linda didn't. Something big. Something that made you wonder, what was Jake hiding? Why wasn't he worried? Back at her house, Linda was busy. She sat at her kitchen table, her phone pressed to her ear, talking fast. "Yes, hello, "This is Linda from Pinewood Heights HOA," she said. "There's a problem. A big problem. The new guy Jake has a dog that won't stop barking. It's ruining everything." She tapped her pen on the table, waiting for the person on the phone to agree with her. "We need to do something about it," she added. "Write him a warning. Tell him to get rid of that dog." She hung up, smiling to herself. She thought she'd won already. Meanwhile, Jake went back to his day. He tossed a ball for Max in the yard, and Max ran after it, barking again. Woof. Woof. The sound floated through the neighborhood. Little Sophie, the girl with the scooter, rode by and waved. "Hi, Max," she called. Mr. Carter, watering his flowers, looked up and grinned. "Lively pup you got there, Jake," he said. Jake waved back. "Yup, he's a good boy," he replied. Everyone seemed fine with Max, everyone except Linda. Later that day, a letter came in the mail for Jake. It was from the HOA. He opened it and read it out loud to Max, who tilted his head like he was listening. "Dear Mr. Jake," it said. "Your dog's barking is too loud. This is a warning. Please keep it quiet, or there will be a fine." Jake laughed a little. "A fine, huh?" he said to Max. "What do you think, buddy?" Max barked woof, and Jake scratched his ears. "That's what I thought," he said. He didn't look scared or upset. He just tossed the letter on the table and went back outside. Linda saw all this from her window. She peeked through her curtains, watching Jake and Max play. "He thinks he can ignore me," she muttered. "We'll see about that." She wrote more notes on her clipboard, her pen scratching fast. She was planning something bigger. She didn't like losing, and to her, Jake was a fight she had to win. But Jake? He didn't seem to care. He kept smiling, kept playing with Max, kept acting like everything was fine. The neighbors started to notice the trouble. Sophie's mom said, "Linda's mad about that dog again." Mr. Carter shook his head. "She needs to relax. It's just a bark." But Linda didn't relax. She got madder every day. And Jake? He got quieter. Not scared quiet, just watching quiet. Like he was waiting for something. Every time Linda yelled or sent a letter, he'd nod, smile, and go back to his life. It was weird. Why wasn't he fighting back? What was he up to? That's when you could feel it, the tension. It was like a rubber band stretching tighter and tighter. Linda was pushing hard, sure she'd make Jake bend. But Jake wasn't bending. He was steady, calm, and maybe even a little amused. Something was coming. Something Linda didn't expect. And it all started with that big, happy woof. From Max. What was going to happen next? You'll find out soon, because the story's about to get even better. Days passed in Pinewood Heights, and Linda didn't stop. She was like a bee that wouldn't quit buzzing around Jake. Every day, she found new ways to be mean. One morning, Jake woke up to find a note stuck to his front door. It was written in big, angry letters, "Control your beast," it said. The next day, another note showed up, "You don't belong here." Linda's handwriting was messy, like she was so mad she could barely hold the pen. She'd sneak over when no one was looking, tape the notes up, and march back to her house, thinking she was winning. It didn't end with notes. Linda called the HOA again. She told them Max was too loud, that his barking was breaking all the rules. The HOA listened to her because she was the bossy queen of the neighborhood. A few days later, Jake got a letter in the mail. It said he had to pay a fine $50 because of excessive noise. $50? That's a lot of money just for a dog being a dog. Linda was sure this would scare Jake, maybe even make him leave. She watched from her porch, waiting for him to get mad or pack his bags. But Jake? He didn't do any of that. He opened the letter, read it, and shrugged. "Okay, Max," he said to his dog, "guess we owe them some cash." He pulled out his wallet, wrote a check, and mailed it back to the HOA. Then he grabbed Max's leash and took him for a walk, just like always. He didn't yell. He didn't complain. He even smiled while he walked, waving at the neighbors like nothing was wrong. Weird, right? Most people would be upset, but not Jake. The neighbors started talking. Little Sophie, the girl with the scooter, saw the notes on Jake's door and told her mom. "Why is Linda so mean to Jake?" she asked. Her mom sighed. "That's just Linda. She doesn't like new people." Mr. Carter, the flower watering guy, shook his head when he heard about the fine. "Poor Jake," he said. "Linda's out to get him. That dog's not hurting anyone." Everyone felt bad for Jake. They'd see him and Max walking around, happy as can be, and wonder why Linda was making such a fuss. Linda didn't care what the neighbors thought. She kept going. She'd stand on her porch, arms crossed, staring at Jake's house like a hawk. Every time Max barked woof, she'd scribble something on her clipboard. She was planning her next move, sure she could break Jake. "He'll give up soon," she'd mutter to herself. "No one ignores me." But Jake didn't give up. He didn't even seem to notice her glaring. He'd toss a ball for Max, laugh when the dog tripped over his own floppy ears, and keep living his life. It was like Linda's tricks didn't bother him at all. Then, something strange happened. One morning, the sun was just coming up, and a police car rolled down the street. It moved slow, real slow, like the cops inside were looking for something. The car stopped right by Jake's house for a minute. Linda was on her porch, sipping her tea, and she saw it. Her eyes got big, and a sneaky smile spread across her face. "Ha," she said to herself. "They're here because of that dog. I knew it." She thought the police had come to tell Jake off, maybe even take Max away. She leaned forward, waiting to see Jake in trouble. But here's the funny part: Jake didn't look worried. The police car sat there for a second, and then Jake stepped out onto his porch. He was holding a cup of coffee, wearing his usual jeans and a t-shirt. He saw the cops, raised his hand, and waved. Waved. Like they were old friends stopping by to say hi. The cops waved back, then drove off. Linda blinked. Her smile faded. "What was that?" she muttered. She didn't get it. Why wasn't Jake scared? Why were the cops waving at him? She was too busy thinking up her next plan to figure it out. Jake went back inside, and Max trotted out to sniff the grass. "Woof!" he barked, happy as ever. Linda didn't see the wave as a clue. She didn't think it meant anything special. She just huffed and wrote more notes on her clipboard. "I'll get him," she said under her breath. "He can't stay here forever." She was sure she was in charge, that she'd win this fight. But what she didn't know: trouble was coming, and it wasn't coming for Jake. The days kept going, and little hints kept popping up. One afternoon, a man in a dark jacket stopped by Jake's house. He knocked on the door, and Jake let him in. They talked for a while, maybe an hour, then the man left. Linda saw it from her window and frowned. "Who's that?" she wondered. She didn't like strangers, especially not at Jake's place. Another day, Jake got a phone call. He stepped outside to take it, speaking low so no one could hear. Linda tried to listen, but she was too far away. "What's he up to?" she grumbled. The neighbors saw things too. Sophie's mom noticed the police car and said, "That's odd. Cops don't just drive by like that." Mr. Carter saw the man in the jacket and scratched his head. "Jake's got some interesting friends," he said. But no one asked Jake about it. He was still the nice guy with the loud dog, and they didn't want to bother him. Linda, though. She was getting madder and maybe a little nervous. Jake wasn't acting like someone who was scared of her. He was too calm, too happy. Every note, every fine, every glare, none of it worked. Jake paid the $50 and kept going. Max barked, and Jake smiled. Linda's tricks were falling flat, and she didn't know why. The tension was building, like a storm getting ready to break. Something big was hiding behind Jake's quiet ways, and it was getting closer. Linda thought she was the hunter, chasing Jake down. But maybe, just maybe, she was the one being watched. What was Jake's secret? Why didn't he care about Linda's mean notes and fines? And those cops, why were they so friendly with him? The answers were coming, and they were going to surprise everyone, especially Linda. Things were heating up in Pinewood Heights, and the next part? It's going to be wild. Stick around, you won't believe what happens next. It all came crashing down on a sunny Saturday afternoon in Pinewood Heights. The day started like any other. The sky was blue, birds were chirping, and Max, Jake's big, goofy dog, was out in the yard. Max was having the best time ever. He was chasing his own tail, spinning in circles like a top. His floppy ears flapped, and his tail wagged so fast it was a blur. Every few seconds, he let out a huge bark, woof woof woof. It echoed through the neighborhood, loud and happy, like Max was telling everyone how much fun he was having. Most people didn't mind. Little Sophie giggled from her scooter across the street. Mr. Carter smiled as he trimmed his bushes. But Linda? Oh, Linda had had enough. She'd been mad about Max for weeks, and today, that barking pushed her over the edge. She was inside her house, trying to read her HOA rule book, when Max's woof hit her ears. She slammed the book shut, her face turning red like a fire truck. That's it, she yelled to herself. I can't take it anymore. Linda jumped up, grabbed her phone, and dialed 911. She didn't even think twice. She held the phone tight and screeched into it, "Help! There's a dangerous dog loose. It's barking like crazy, and I'm scared. Send someone now." Her voice was loud and shaky, like she was in a big panic. She hung up, crossed her arms, and marched out to her porch. She stood there, staring at Jake's yard, waiting for the police to come rushing in with sirens blaring. "This'll show him," she muttered, a mean little smile on her lips. She thought she'd finally won. But here's where everything flipped upside down. Linda waited, tapping her foot, looking down the street for flashing lights. She didn't hear sirens. Not one. Instead, something wild happened. The front door of Jake's house swung open, and 2 police officers stepped out. Yup, they came from inside Jake's house. They were tall, wearing dark blue uniforms with shiny badges. Linda's jaw dropped. Her mouth hung open like a fish out of water. "What the?" she stammered, her eyes big and confused. Jake walked out right behind them. He was calm as could be, like this was no big deal. He had his hands in his pockets and a little grin on his face. He leaned against the porch railing, casual and cool, while Max sat beside him, wagging his tail. Linda blinked hard, trying to figure out what was happening. Jake looked at her and said, "Hey, Linda. Meet my friends. They're cops. They've been staying with me all week." The officers tipped their hats at her, nice and polite. "Ma'am," one of them said, his voice deep and serious. Then he kept talking, and Linda's whole world started to shake. "We got a tip about some shady stuff going on at your place," he said. "Care to explain those weird packages you've been hiding?" Linda's face went white like all the color drained out of it. She took a step back, her arms dropping to her sides. Packages," she stuttered. "I don't know what you mean." But the cops weren't buying it. The second officer nodded. "Yeah, we've been watching," he said. "Lots of strange boxes coming to your house lately." "What's in them, huh?" Linda's eyes darted around, like she was looking for a way to run. She didn't have an answer. She just stood there, frozen, while the neighbors started peeking out their windows. Sophie's mom gasped. Mr. Carter dropped his garden clippers. Everyone was watching now. Jake finally stepped forward, still smiling that easy smile. "Oh, Linda," he said, shaking his head. "You thought Max was the problem? Guess you didn't know who I really am." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I'm not just some guy with a dog. I'm an undercover detective. Been keeping an eye on you this whole time." Boom. There it was, the big reveal. Linda's knees wobbled. She grabbed the porch railing to steady herself. "A detective," she squeaked. The cops nodded again. "Yup," the first one said. "Jake's one of us. Moved in to watch the neighborhood. And you, ma'am, have some explaining to do." Turns out, Linda's perfect life wasn't so perfect. Those packages. They weren't just mail. For months, she'd been getting boxes full of stolen stuff, jewelry, watches, even money from shady deals. She thought no one would notice, hiding them in her garage under old blankets. She acted like the HOA queen, bossing everyone around, but she was the real troublemaker. And Jake? He'd known all along. That's why he was so calm. That's why he didn't care about her notes or fines. He was waiting for the right moment to catch her. The cops had been staying with Jake to help him watch. That police car Linda saw. It wasn't there for Max, it was checking on her. The man in the dark jacket? Another detective, dropping off clues. Every time Linda thought she was winning, Jake was one step ahead. She'd been so busy hating Max's bark that she didn't see the trap closing around her. Linda tried to talk her way out of it. "This is a mistake," she yelled. "I'm the HOA president. You can't do this." But the cops didn't listen. They stepped closer, and one pulled out a little notebook. "We've got proof," he said. "Witnesses, pictures, everything. You're in big trouble, ma'am." Linda's mean smile was gone now. She looked scared, really scared. Jake tossed a ball to Max, who barked happily woof, and ran after it. "Good boy," Jake said, laughing a little. He looked at Linda one last time. "Next time, maybe don't judge a dog or a neighbor too quick," he said. The cops started walking toward Linda's house, ready to check those packages. The neighborhood was buzzing. Everyone was out now, whispering and pointing. Linda's perfect little kingdom was falling apart, and Jake? He just turned everything upside down with one big, awesome surprise. What a moment. Linda thought she'd called the cops on Max, but they were already there for her. Jake wasn't just a guy with a loud dog. He was a hero, sneaky and smart, waiting to save the day. And Linda? She was about to learn a lesson she'd never forget. Stick around, the ending's coming, and it's going to be great. The cops didn't mess around. Right after Jake told everyone he was a detective, they walked straight to Linda's house. Their boots thumped on the pavement, and their faces were serious. The whole neighborhood was buzzing like a beehive. People poked their heads out of windows and stepped onto their porches to watch. Little Sophie stopped her scooter. Mr. Carter put down his watering can. Everyone wanted to see what would happen next. Those packages Linda had been hiding? They weren't just random boxes. The cops went into her garage and pulled out all kinds of stuff: shiny jewelry, fancy watches, even stacks of money. It was all stolen. Linda had been sneaking those things into her house for months, hiding them under old blankets and boxes so no one would know. She thought she was so smart, acting like the perfect HOA queen while doing sneaky, bad things. But Jake had figured it out, and now the cops had the proof. Linda didn't give up easy, though. When the cops started pulling out the stolen goods, she freaked out. "This is a mistake," she yelled, waving her arms. "I'm the HOA president. You can't do this to me." Her voice was loud and squeaky, like she was trying to scare them away. But the cops didn't care. One of them held up a shiny necklace from the pile and said, "Explain this, ma'am." Linda's mouth opened, then closed. She didn't have any good answers. The cuffs came out click, click, and snapped onto her wrists. She was caught, and there was no way out. As the cops led her to the squad car, Linda turned her head and glared at Jake. Her eyes were like little darts, full of anger. Jake was standing on his porch, cool as ever. He just shrugged, like it was no big deal. Then he reached into his pocket, pulled out a dog treat, and tossed it to Max. Max jumped up, caught it in his mouth, and wagged his tail. "Woof!" he barked, happy and loud. For once, no one told him to be quiet. Linda's mean face got even meaner, but the cops kept walking her away. The neighbors couldn't believe it. They started clapping and cheering. "Way to go, Jake!" Mr. Carter shouted, pumping his fist in the air. Sophie's mom smiled big and yelled, "You're awesome, Jake." Even little Sophie jumped off her scooter and clapped her hands. Max barked again, woof, and ran in circles, like he was celebrating too. The street was full of noise, but this time, it was happy noise. Linda's reign was over. She couldn't boss anyone around anymore. Jake waved at everyone, still smiling that calm smile. He wasn't just the new guy now. He was the hero who'd saved the day, all without making a fuss. He'd moved in, watched Linda, and waited until the perfect moment to show who he really was. The cops drove off with Linda in the back seat, her head down. The neighborhood felt lighter, like a big weight was gone. By the end of the day, Pinewood Heights was peaceful again. Max played in the yard, barking whenever he wanted. Jake sat on his porch, sipping lemonade, happy to be done with the secret job. The neighbors knew the truth now: Jake wasn't just a guy with a loud dog. He was the one who'd quietly made everything right. And Linda? She was gone, off to face the trouble she'd made for herself. Justice was served, and it felt good. So there you have it, friends. What a wild ride, right? This whole story started with a big, happy bark from Max and ended with Jake turning everything upside down in Pinewood Heights. It's pretty cool when you think about it. Sometimes, the loudest bark doesn't mean trouble, it comes from the friendliest dog around. And sometimes, the quietest guy on the street, the one who just smiles and waves, is the one you should really pay attention to. Jake was like that. He didn't yell or fight. He stayed calm and sneaky, and in the end, he was the hero. Linda didn't get it. She thought she knew everything about Jake just because he was new and Max barked a lot. She saw his smile and his goofy dog and decided he didn't belong. She judged him too fast. All those mean notes, the fines, the yelling, it was all because she looked at the outside and didn't bother to see what was inside. She thought Jake was weak, someone she could push around. But boy, was she wrong. Jake wasn't weak at all. He was strong and smart, and he had a big secret she never saw coming. Linda's perfect little world fell apart because she didn't take the time to really look. That makes you think, doesn't it? How many times do we look at someone or even a dog and think we know who they are? Maybe we see someone loud and think they're trouble. Or maybe we see someone quiet and think they're not important. But this story shows us that's not always true. Max was loud, sure, but he was just a happy pup who loved to play. Jake was quiet, but he was a detective who saved the day. Linda judged them both by what she saw on the outside, Max's bark and Jake's smile, and she missed the real story. She didn't see the truth until it was too late. It's like a book, you know? You can't tell what's inside just by looking at the cover. A book might have a plain cover, but the pages could be full of adventure. Or it might look exciting on the outside, but the story's boring. People are like that too. You have to open the book, talk to them, watch them, give them a chance before you know what they're really like. Linda didn't open Jake's book. She just saw the cover and decided she didn't like it. And look what happened, she ended up in big trouble because of it. So here's the big lesson: don't judge too quick. Not a book, not a neighbor, not even a pup with a loud bark. Take a second to look closer. Maybe that loud kid in class is just excited to share something cool. Maybe the quiet one in the corner has a great idea they're waiting to say. Maybe the new person next door is awesome, even if they're different. You won't know until you try to find out. Jake and Max showed us that. They were more than what Linda thought, and they proved it in the best way. What about you? Have you ever met a Linda in your life? Someone who's bossy or quick to judge? Maybe a kid at school who thinks they're in charge of everything? Or maybe you've been a little like Linda sometimes, deciding you don't like someone before you really know them. It's okay, we all make mistakes. But now you've got this story to remember. Next time, maybe you'll wait a bit, look a little harder, and see the real person or dog underneath. Jake didn't let Linda stop him. He stayed true to himself, kept Max happy, and did what was right. That's pretty inspiring, huh? You can be like that too. Be kind, be brave, and don't worry if someone doesn't get you at first. The truth always comes out in the end, just like it did for Jake. And who knows? Maybe you've got a little hero inside you, waiting for the perfect moment to shine. So keep being you, loud bark, quiet smile, or anything in between. The world's better when we all give each other a chance. What do you think? Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever had a Linda in your life? Or maybe a Jake who surprised you? I'd love to hear your stories. Let's keep this fun going.